In life, there are a great many hard questions, ones which are even harder to answer than they are to ask. Do you still love me? Can I say goodbye? How much parmesan would you like? When we're faced with questions like these, we might be afraid to look for the answers, lest we find something so frightening, so hard to process, that we wish we had never looked in the first place. Maybe they don't love you anymore, and you have to reconcile that belief. Maybe you can't say goodbye and you have to deal with that lack of closure. Or maybe you're going to add too little parmesan to your food and ruin your dinner. Or add too much and watch the cheese pile up on your plate as the waiter stares desperately into your eyes, waiting for a sign to stop that never comes. One of the hardest questions to ask, and one of the most challenging to answer, is, of all the killers to main, why the fuck would you pick the twins? For such a hard question to answer, the answer itself is surprisingly simple. The twins have the most technically complicated and versatile power in the game, with a kit that has limitless potential for shenanigans. Shenanigans being a term that here means tricks and strategies, the likes of which other killers could only dream of. And that is what we'll be covering in this video. Every tip, trick and tactic I've picked up from my time playing the twins since their release in December. Which is all the more reason for you to look away, put your phone down, close the tab, and go watch something else instead. They say ignorance is bliss, and in that regard, the Double Dialect community is one of the most blissful in the world, and I would not seek to deprive you of such bliss by burdening you with the information that I've had to carry around with me for 9 months. In this video, we'll be covering strategies and scenarios beyond the linear, such as using the twins' unique strength to process teams total time, information denial and survivor manipulation to engineer quick downs and easy snowballs, and the finer points of pouncing and handling pallets as twins, both separated and together. But despite all the information this guide will have to offer, I have no better piece of advice than this. Look away now, while you still have the chance, and go and watch something more enjoyable instead. Admittedly, those who have already seen my episodes on the basics of the twins and the applications of their add-ons are probably impossible to discourage at this point. I assume there's nothing more I can say that will put you off of watching this video. So my only remaining piece of advice to you is this. Don't say I didn't warn you. The prior episodes of this series have covered the basics of playing the twins, and a guide to their add-ons. If you're new to the twins and haven't seen those yet, I'd recommend you do so before watching this video. But this is the one I've been looking forward to the most. All the clever techs, tricks and strategies you can employ that makes the difference between a twins player and a twins master. And the first thing I want to talk about is time management and the 2 and 2 model. Loosely, knowing what you're doing with one of the twins while the other one is being controlled. Mastery of this is a great way to mitigate the twins' massive inherent clunkiness, since it lets you save time where otherwise you would find yourself wasting it. And make no mistake, time is not something you have a lot of with this killer. With huge stuns between doing, well, anything, and the fact that you directly lose distance every time you switch to Charlotte, the twins are not what you'd call a nimble killer, despite Victor being very fast. Recouping any time you invest into getting downs and hooks is essential, and a good way to do this is something that I call the 2 and 2 model. You want to spend as much of the game as possible with 2 people incapacitated, because that's something that the twins are uniquely good at doing. The best way I find to do this is to hit 1 or 2 people with Charlotte at the beginning of the match, deploy Victor to down one of them, and then attach Victor to somebody healthy, so that another person is out of action while Charlotte gets the pickup and hook. This means that instead of eating a brick wall of fatigue just to get a single hook while 3 people slam gens, you can hook a survivor just as a 30-second timer of Victor's attachment passes. And you can see his playmate's aura before recalling. Once that person is hooked, you then have a few options depending on what you picked up from Victor's detection or the state of the game as a whole. If you know where the injured person is, maybe because they waited too long and showed you their aura, or because you saw them on barbecue and chili. That's a fairly easy down if you can get to them. Alternatively, if they're wasting time resetting with a teammate, you can head over to disrupt the heal and force the 4th person to get off the generator to save. Sometimes Victor will find someone on a generator while his playmate is running around like a headless chicken. If you want to protect that gen, Victor can give you the info to bully that person off of it, leaving Victor's former playmate in a really sticky situation. Let's say that person 1 is on hook, person 2 is being chased by Charlotte, and person 3 has just removed Victor and chooses to remain injured and just work on a generator far away from the action. The guy on hook, person 1, is relying on person 4 to get off of their generator to go and save. So person 4 goes to save, person 3 is sitting on generator injured, and while person 1 and 4 are healing, you down person 2 with the 1-2 punch of Charlotte and Victor. So what's stopping you from using the 2 and 2 model again and sending Victor over to the injured person 3? He'll go down in one hit, he's working on a generator, and he's on his own because everybody else is either downed or resetting. If Victor finds him, you suddenly have half a team on the ground, allowing you to rack up hook states potentially very early or cause a total cessation of progress on generators and healing, as the guys at the first hook now have to come back and pick up slugs before you can get the hooks. Any good killer player will tell you that 2 hooks in the same kind of place, near a gen regressing with pop or ruin, is a very hard stalemate for the survivors to break. And with the twins it's actually very possible, if you use a 2 and 2 model to make sure as many survivors are kept busy as you can. I like barbecue and chili on twins for that exact reason. Having perfect information on what you should do at any given moment after a hook is indispensable. It lets you find where people are resetting so Victor can maybe intercept. It helps you find which gen to use pop on. It helps you herd healthy people away from the hook to force other people off gens to put themselves in harm's way for the save. One thing that can be very powerful with the 2 and 2 model is using Victor to prevent quick resets after unhooks. Survivors often prioritise healing against the twins, and will regularly heal under hooks to save time if the twins aren't camping. But it can be very useful to check on a recently vacated hook with Victor, because he can massively delay the survivor's ability to reset, especially in the period after a fresh down. Some of the strongest plays you can make involve downing someone with Victor, finding a healthy person healing the guy they just unhooked and then attaching Victor to them, meaning the unhooked person isn't getting healed, and ensuring that you have multiple potential targets for Victor after you get your hook. Because not only is the person who's just been unhooked injured, their rescuer now is too, and because of Victor's detection, you know where to catch them healing once they get rid of him. This goes for any situation when you find a healthy and injured survivor together with Victor and Charlotte has something to do. Attaching to the healthy survivor to prevent a reset and provide information while Charlotte picks someone up or deploys a pop or whatever is way more useful than getting a down that you won't be able to capitalise on. That's why when I play Survivor against twins, I'll sometimes actually take hits for my healthy teammates while injured and go down if Charlotte's far away from me, because I know if my teammates pull off a kick, they can pick me up before Charlotte gets there, meaning that she's basically done nothing. 2 people injured are a lot more valuable than 1 down survivor and 1 healthy one if you're unable to convert that down into a snowball or a hook. Overslugging is a very real concern with these killers. If you down someone with Victor and then overcommit to another down further away from Charlotte, rather than be content with a guaranteed pickup or an attach, you run the risk of the first survivor getting picked up and undoing your early pressure, which can massively delay your ability to get early hooks and get the ball rolling. Slugging in the early game is extremely dangerous, because that's where medkit charges and unbreakables are going to be available. It's when survivors are healthy and able to take hits for their teammates without risking dying. It's an important skill to learn, to be able to resist the temptation to get greedy. Unless the survivors are literally feeding health states to you, the 2 and 2 model of a down into an attach will do a great job of saving you time, while not putting you at too much risk of overslugging. Another one of the best ways to save time is to ensure survivors have as little information as possible, because one of the biggest advantages the twins have that nobody talks about is how hard it is to keep track of the killer's location when there are 2 people in 2 places at once. Especially since Victor is borderline impossible to track, with a shriek radius instead of a terror radius, no red stain, and immunity to survivor detection perks, like Dark Sense, Alert, or even Spine Chill. And Charlotte loses her terror radius when Victor is being controlled. To that end, the opportunities abound to mess with the survivors' heads, simply because most survivors are incapable of the focus needed to hold him while on a generator, and breathe with their mouth shut at the same time, much less the ability to keep track of 2 killers at the same time. When a survivor is hit, especially by Victor, they tend to panic and resort to just holding Shift W in a straight line away from whatever hit them, because distance is good, perhaps with the survivor not realising they're running into a trap.
Watch out, watch out, watch out, watch out!
A good example of when this is handy is if you're in Victor mode going after someone healthy. Maybe it's because you're doing the 2 and 2 model and it's a follow up after a down. Maybe it's because they're resetting and you want to intercept. Maybe it's because you just want to get them off a generator and Charlotte isn't close enough. But at any rate, you find your target and you want to go for a pounce. The tempting thing to do is just to attack them immediately. But if the survivor is oblivious to Charlotte's location, you can try and play a bit of a trick on them with Victor if you take a short detour. Instead of taking the most direct line of travel, you can sneak around them and attack them, so that when they hold W away from where Victor hit them, they run straight into Charlotte who's waiting for them. They're oblivious while Victor is attached, which makes this a lot easier, so you can hide your red light as your paths cross that can very easily translate into a free down, hand-delivered, straight to your doorstep. The key to doing this correctly is unbinding and switching in the right places. You're way more likely to catch someone out by hiding Charlotte behind something or inside a loop that they're going to run into, than you are by just leaving her in the open. Information denial is the secret killer of DBD, and the twins are unrivaled at it. This can just as easily go the other way too. Hiding Victor in a survivor's blind spot or a path they're likely to travel, to get to a generator or a hook or just to escape, can throw a real spanner in the works, especially if they've just been hit by Charlotte and think they can W key for distance. This can require some setup and some foresight, but between Victor's detection, your basic game sense, and the fact I always run barbecue and chili, this can be relatively easy to do, and set you up for easy downs and crazy snowballing. Take this clip for example. See, Cheryl leaves the safe house so I get a nice quick down with Victor, recovering nice and fast because this was an old twins animations and recovery time before behaviour ruined everything. Since nobody came for the kick, I assume they're all far away on generators, so I send Victor up the map to go and check on generators at the other end of the map. If anybody is working on them, Victor can see them either through line of sight or his detection, so I could attach if I saw somebody working on one but I didn't see anyone, so I just left him there. The one generator I can't see from this position is House of Pain, but leaving Victor here means I can see anybody leaving House of Pain, and I can intercept them before they go for the unhook. Since Charlotte is so close, I can very easily get the pickup and put Cheryl straight on a hook. The only person I see on barbecue is Fang, meaning the other two are in the school and probably waiting to get the save. But I want to use my pop, so I head to the main building and hope to try and bully Fang off of it. Right now, Fang's only exit to that building doesn't take her back towards the hook where they're going to try and save, involves taking the back window of the house and running towards House of Pain. I get the injury and I get my pop, and Feng runs the only place she could ever have run, back towards House of Pain. Victor, who I had left to monitor gens and intercept anybody leaving House of Pain, now springs into action as Feng approaches the building. I use Charlotte's positioning and bearings to get my bearings with Victor. Feng was running in the same direction Charlotte is facing, so that's where I need to be going. And sure enough, I run into the Fang. That leads to an easy down just as they confirm the unhook, and then I can send Victor over to disrupt the unhook, stop the reset, and potentially snowball. Survivors are typically creatures of habit, and playing twins lets you really abuse those habits. It's one of the reasons the twins are solid on most indoor maps or multi-floor buildings like Badham's main school. If the survivors can't see Victor, they usually just assume he doesn't exist, and run around like unvaccinated children in a school playground, completely ignorant of the fact that he can see them, including on different floors. Setting Victor up on one floor and Charlotte on the other means that you have perfect tracking across both floors, making looping and predicting survivors' actions a breeze, and allowing you to cut off a survivor trying to escape by taking the stairs or a drop. Playing like this by putting Charlotte on one floor and Victor on the other can seal a survivor's fate at many loops where any other killer would have serious trouble. For example, the library in the Raccoon City police station has a long flight of stairs with 2 vaults at the top, so the survivor can force the killer to commit to a chase up the stairs, only to drop down and make the killer head all the way back down again to catch up, making a ton of distance in the process. But if you leave Charlotte at the foot of the stairs and send Victor up, you can just switch as soon as they drop, and they'll still be staggered by the time you're leaving your fatigue, meaning an easy hit and instant pickup for you. Now, let's talk about body blocking, how it works, and how you can use it. The core of body blocking with twins is using Charlotte's idle body to remove the survivor's options to continue to play a tile once Victor is unbound, by preventing them from accessing the pallet. This is usually done by deploying Charlotte at the correct place in the loop, and where that correct place is depends entirely on the loop itself. The simplest thing to do is just to use Charlotte to body block a doorway to prevent a survivor from accessing part of the tile without taking the long way round. Every map has at least one door you can block, whether it's the shack door or the door to a main building or a particular room, and some maps have a ton of these doorways. Blocking off the ability of a survivor to loop or leave a tile normally can be as simple as that. They don't expect Charlotte to function like a roadblock, so they just run into her and dead end themselves into a free Victor hit. And there's no cost to doing this, so I just developed a habit of unbinding or switching in doorways or tight squeezes during a chase, just in case it comes in useful. It's worth remembering a few important things when trying to body block profitably with Charlotte. The big one being that you only retain your collision for 30 seconds. Once you deploy Victor, Charlotte will only function as an obstacle to their movement for 30 seconds. So that is how long you have to get your value and get your hit before the survivor can treat you like you don't exist. Like everything about playing the twins, margin for error here is low as hell. And for as long as you do have collision with the survivors, it's worth remembering Victor and Charlotte have collision with each other. Victor can body block Charlotte and vice versa, so you need to make sure that you're unbinding Victor in the right direction, so you're not denying yourself access to the tile with the survivor in it. Although, once Charlotte loses collision with the survivors, she also loses collision with Victor. So you can absolutely shoot somebody through Charlotte's body if they're trying to use her as cover until 30 seconds are over. But a rather more practical use of body blocking is to directly control a pallet. If you position Charlotte with about half her body sticking out of one side of the pallet and then switch, Charlotte will protrude out just enough that the survivor will not get the prompt to drop the pallet, because Charlotte's model doesn't let them get close enough. This effectively disables the pallet from one side, and you can do something similar at windows to completely block access to them from one side. This aspect of the twins is almost entirely unexplored, but has near limitless applications. Hi Ace. And then we do this. And then we look around this way. He can't take the window, he has to check out the pallet. I thought he actually dropped that. What a psycho. He doesn't get the kick though, he's too slow. Way too slow. Dead hard, if true. Yeah, if you vault the window here and then head Victor this way, they have nowhere to go. Because you cut the pallet off, unless they literally pre-drop and run. Because Charlotte cuts off the window, Victor cuts off the pallet. When I was learning how to body block, I often did something that I have now called safe unbinding, a term which here means trying to body block in such a way that the pallet was no threat to either Charlotte or Victor. This meant I would distance Charlotte away from the pallet, far enough to avoid her being stunned, and deploy Victor on the other side of the pallet, meaning you can effectively herd the survivors back into the pallet and into Charlotte. But this comes with a problem. If the survivor drops the pallet on the opposite side to Charlotte and then vaults it into her, Charlotte is pushed back away from the pallet, usually giving survivors enough wiggle room to escape the loop, or place themselves between the pallet and Charlotte in such a way that Victor hitting them becomes very hard to do. It was also very dependent on the shape of the loop, so I tried out an alternative strategy: unsafe unbinding. This is where you take a slightly greater risk for a much greater reward by facing Charlotte into the pallet and unbinding Victor forwards into the pallet. This does put you in some danger. If the survivor can get back in front of Charlotte, they can drop the pallet on her poor French head, causing you to lose control of Victor and taste a meaty stun. But let's put this in a practical looping scenario. You run Charlotte to the pallet, unless a survivor is camping it, they're unlikely to be close enough to be able to pull the stun off, especially since Victor unbinding there immediately becomes a threat that the survivor wants to steer clear of, on pain of little tiny hands clawing their eyeballs out. The tiny fingernail add-on helps with this enormously, by cutting the unbinding time, and therefore the time a survivor has to react to this in half. If done properly, it completely turns off the survivor's access to the pallet, since Charlotte is sticking out the back of the pallet and Victor is attacking them from the front. The survivor now either has to leave the tile altogether, while Victor catches up at 150% speed, or juke Victor for long enough to be able to get all the way around the loop and smack Charlotte with the pallet. This strategy is at its best at loops with only one easily accessible vault point, like short wall jungle gyms, longer filler pallets like the Coldwind trailer tiles, and the Badham car and ambulance loops, and structures that centre around one particular god pallet like House of Pain. Indoor maps are also generally very good for this, since its tiles are usually one enclosed room with set paths of travel centering around one pallet that you can very easily prevent access to. RPD, Hawkins, Gideon, Midwich. All of these have rooms like this that unsafe unbinding can completely shut down. The only indoor map they struggle on is Larry's, because unlike most indoor maps, survivors have a ton of vaults to choose from. Doesn't matter if you block one pallet when each room has at least one window that the survivor can instantly use. But what if they pre-throw the pallet? You can't unbind into the pallet if it's already down, and if Charlotte isn't close and you're just chasing with Victor, a pre-thrown pallet can represent a roadblock, especially without speed add-ons. I mean, of course Charlotte can break it, but if she's a little way away, or you don't have time to break a pallet, you might just have to play it with Victor. Many pallets can just be zoomed around to try and force a hit, especially with speed add-ons and or Toy Sword. But in the case of some pallets at longer loops or god pallets, you're going to need to brute force through them, which is where a technique I've called slide teching comes in. Because let me tell you this, Blight and Oni are not the only killers capable of using sliding to their advantage. Here's where a piece of wisdom I originally brought up but during my second Twins Guide episode comes into its own. Victor's kick timer after a missed pounce is 3 seconds, but if a survivor tries to kick you at the end of the timer, the kick will be cancelled if the animation is not complete by the 3-second mark. You can abuse this by hopping on top of a dropped pallet or other piece of the environment for most of your kick timer, but sliding down onto ground level just before you time out and die. If you get it right, the survivor will not have time to complete the kick after you drop. So if they're camping the pallet, you can just wind up again and hit the survivor almost immediately. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you have to, because it's time consuming and very risky. If you do it too early, you risk getting kicked. If you do it too late, you'll die on the pallet or in the air on the way to the ground. But if done perfectly, the slide tech is a surefire way to deal with obstacles the Victor would otherwise find impassable. Shack is where I find this technique to be at its most useful, since you can hop on top of the box that holds up the pallet, stop yourself sliding off of it too early. but it can be used at basically any palette, so try it out and see for yourself where you find it to be the most useful. In terms of add-ons that affect this, Stale Biscuit and Ceremonial Candelabrum change how this one works a little bit. Candelabrum increases the kick timer to 0.5 seconds, meaning you can drop down a little bit earlier and still avoid getting hit by the full kick animation, whereas Stale Biscuit decreases the pounce cooldown altogether. This means that you get to drop down earlier, but also means you have to drop down earlier, because when your cooldown recovers, you'll die if you're on the pallet. The Biscuit Candelabrum combo that I advocated in episode 2 means you can slide tech extremely aggressively and drop down super early, so the survivor gains very little distance after dropping the pallet. Despite this, I'd recommend learning to slide tech with either just Toy Sword or no pounce rate add-ons at all, just so you can get the timing down and land safely and consistently where you need to be. So far we've covered map management and the 2-and-2 model, intelligent unbinding to make stealth plays, body blocking to deny pallet access, and the slide tech. Now the last thing I want to talk about is pouncing itself, because there are a lot of things people do not understand about pounce. Pounce has been most commonly compared to a Demogorgon shred or maybe a Huntress hatchet, and I'd say it's got a lot of similarities to both, with a little bit of Blight's Lethal Rush in there. Pounce often gets accused of having janky hitboxes to the point that it's allegedly impossible to miss a pounce, which anyone who's watched my streams knows is absolute horseshit. Unless you happen to be playing on that Romanian McDonald's Wi-Fi, you miss so many pounces by the skin of your teeth simply because of how Victor's hitboxes work. And I say hitboxes because uniquely among projectiles, he actually has 2. When pouncing, Victor's 1 hitbox becomes 2. His model collision box, which we're just going to call his hitbox, and the actual damage box of his pounce attack, which we're going to call his hurt box. And the 2 are arranged like this, with Victor's hurt box slightly in front of and above his actual hitbox. What this does is a few things. Primarily, it lets you land hits on people vaulting windows without requiring Victor to fully clear the window. If the hitbox and hurt box were the same, you'd never be able to hit a vaulting survivor because your hitbox would collide with the terrain slightly before colliding with them, because the terrain is bigger and lower than the survivor and you're pouncing from ground level, resulting in a miss even though you hit the survivor dead on. You should pounce with this in mind. If the survivor is on the top half of your screen as your hands touch them, that should be a hit. This is why many survivors crouch to break line of sight with Victor, but at a few places you can do the Huntress thing and intentionally aim your shots a little lower than you would normally to drop down mid-flight and hit the survivor anyway. Flicking a pounce is probably also a skill you want to get down. You'll notice sometimes after I land a close range pounce, you'll see Victor spinning for a second after the hit connects. That's because I flicked the pounce to get the hit. A little sneaky secret. Victor's pounce can not only be flicked to swivel you toward the survivor just before the pounce goes off, it can also be controlled slightly in the air just as you leave the ground. Yes, you can flick Victor's pounce mid-air like Blight flicking a rush or Hillbilly curving his chainsaw. This can be combined with pre-charging a pounce by winding up as you go around a corner to really catch survivors off guard and literally blindside them into the ground. You can even ricochet a pounce off of some objects by sliding Victor's hitbox off the side of a piece of terrain without colliding his hurt box at the front with it. This is a technique that I've been working on alongside Linksy, a fellow Twins main who you should all be checking out, and it's still in its infancy, so I encourage any aspiring Twins mains out there to test it out. I spoke earlier about difficult questions, and how difficult it is to answer the question, why do you main the Twins? I hope that not just this guide, but all the guides and streams and VODs I've made about the Twins so far, and anything I go on to make in the future, have been more than sufficient to answer this question. The Twins are not a perfect killer, and they're in serious need of some TLC from behaviour, but it's fair to say that they are the most creative power they've ever made. And every time I think I've learned everything there is to learn about them, something new bubbles to the surface. I hope these guides have been of some value to you, whether you're a Twins veteran looking to hone your skills, or a newcomer who just wants to see what all the fuss was about. Many people will tell you that the Twins should never have existed, that they're a design mistake that spelled the beginning of the end of behaviour caring about what they make. If you thought this way at the start of this guide series and still believe so now, I have no more words for you, except those of Madeline Deshayes herself. Your binding is no curse, my loves. It is your strength to draw upon. You might think that the Deshayes Twins ought to be strong and feel good when you're playing well. Behaviour not nerfing or treating them wrong, with a tone full of stories to tell. But there's no balance changes, not here and not now. The patch notes are nothing but woe. You might dream skill and tactics would win you the game, but that isn't quite how the twins go.
You might think that two siblings both fighting as one would be treated with love, not disdain.
But while their potential is second to none, all some people do is complain.
But there's no balance, changes not here and not now. The patch notes are nothing but woe. You might dream skill and tactics will win you the game, but that isn't quite how twins go.
I once loved a girl, I still do deep inside, but maining her caused me frustration. As great as she is, I just couldn't abide such poor vomit hit registration. What?
But there's no balance changes, not here and not now. The patch notes are nothing but woe.
You might dream skill and tactics would win you the game, but that isn't quite how the twins go.
Some people's killers get pages of lore, some others get skins, I suppose. But Victor and Charlotte will still be ignored, 'cause that's how behaviour goes. 'Cause that's how behaviour goes.